Look, you're in for a wild ride with this one. We know this is a sensitive topic and we will handle it with care. Just know we've made very quality videos in the past on this very topic about you being God. And we're going to explain it even more in depth, 10 times more, no 20, maybe even 30 times more in depth than we did the first, second, and third times that we touched on this. So just hold your horses. If you're religious, be patient. I'm going to map this out for you in a way that you can understand. And then, towards the end of this video, I'm going to show you undeniable proof that you are God with a practical exercise we'll do together. So strap your seatbelt up and get ready for this wild ride of godhood. Let's begin. We're going to try not to distract you with too many blinding animations and all that. We want you to really listen to what I'm about to say so that you can digest this to the best of your ability. 2 words I want you to understand immediately. The first is mysticism, and the second is devotion. Mysticism is the direct pursuit of union with the Absolute, the practice of transcending ordinary consciousness to experience reality as it actually is, not through belief or second-hand knowledge, but through immediate recognition. It's the path of those who refuse to take anyone's word for truth and instead seek to know it directly. Devotion is the complete surrender of the limited self to something recognized as greater, the offering of attention and love so total that the one who offers and the one who receives merge into a single movement of consciousness recognizing itself. Now, in the context of this video, mysticism is absolutely essential to understand, especially if you're religious. The concept of striving to become God, or more accurately, to recognize that you already are, through developing your Christ-like nature and worshiping everything. Every person, every experience becomes an act of recognition. When I say worshiping everything, that's where devotion comes in. Sadhguru said something that cuts right through centuries of confusion. There is a fine line between devotion and deception. That sentence rings true for most of the world's religions today, all sects, all denominations. Most of the major religious traditions have crossed that line from devotion into deception without even knowing it. That quote needs to be tattooed on your consciousness. There is a fine line between devotion and deception. Devotion is one of the eightfold paths of enlightenment. The eightfold path to enlightenment is what every mystic tradition understood and practiced. These aren't the same as Buddhism's Noble Eightfold Path, though there's overlap. What I'm talking about are 8 distinct approaches to the same recognition, 8 doorways into the same reality. Devotion is one. Meditation is another. Then there's Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge and intellect, reading, studying, contemplating until the mind exhausts itself and collapses into direct knowing. Karma Yoga is the path of action, where every deed becomes a gesture of recognition. There's Raja Yoga, the royal path of systematic practice. Hatha Yoga, the path through the body. Mantra Yoga, the path of sacred sound. And Tantra, the path of embracing everything, rejecting nothing. 8 doors into one room. Now, devotion is presented as one of the easier paths. That's what every mystic tradition knew. Devotion could lead to enlightenment, to godhood, to merging with the Absolute more quickly than some other paths, because it bypasses the mind's endless questioning. When devotion is real, the separate self dissolves in the fire of love before it even knows what's happening. But here's the problem, and this is where we need to talk about deception. If you're tracking what I'm saying so far, if the distinction between mysticism and devotion is landing for you, drop a comment. Especially if you're coming from a religious background, I want to know how this is sitting with you. Does this challenge what you were taught, or does it clarify something you always sensed? Let me know where you are with this. Devotion has room for massive, catastrophic deception. More than any other path, because devotion requires you to surrender, to give yourself completely to something outside yourself, or so it seems. And that's where religions have gone wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. They've taken devotion and aimed it at the wrong target. They've told you to worship something external, something separate, something up there or out there or in the past or in the future. They've told you that God is other, that divinity is distant, that you are fundamentally separate from the source of all existence. And they've built entire systems of control on that lie. That's the deception. But the true mystic traditions, not the watered-down religious institutions, but the actual lineages of direct realization, they understood something different. They knew that devotion only works when it's aimed correctly. And the correct target of devotion is consciousness itself, reality itself, existence itself, which is not separate from you. The proof I'm going to show you later will make this undeniable. We're going to do something together that demonstrates beyond any doubt that what you call you and what traditions call God are not two things. But we need to build the foundation first. So let's talk about the other paths briefly, because understanding them helps you see where devotion fits and why it's been so corrupted. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, is for those with sharp intellects who can use discrimination to cut through illusion. You study, you contemplate, you use the mind as a scalpel to dissect reality until you recognize what's always been true. This path is slow but precise. It's harder to deceive someone on this path because they're constantly questioning, constantly verifying. Karma Yoga, the path of action, is for those who transform every deed into an offering. Not an offering to some separate God, but an offering of the limited self back into the unlimited reality it never actually left. You work, you serve, you act, but without the sense that there's a separate you doing it. The action happens, but the doer dissolves. Raja Yoga, the royal path, is systematic meditation and practice. You work with breath, concentration, energy, gradually refining consciousness until it recognizes itself. This path is methodical, scientific. Hatha Yoga goes through the body, understanding that this physical form is not separate from consciousness, but its crystallization. When you work with the body correctly, consciousness wakes up to itself through form. Mantra Yoga uses sound, vibration, the fundamental frequencies that precede and create form. Consciousness vibrating as sound, collapsing back into the silence that contains all sound. And Tantra embraces everything pleasure and pain, light and dark, sacred and profane, recognizing that if consciousness is truly all there is, then nothing can be excluded from the path. 8 paths. 1 destination. Or more accurately, 8 ways of recognizing that you never left the destination. But devotion got corrupted because it's the path that requires the least intellectual understanding. You don't need to study texts. You don't need to master complex practices. You just need to love, to surrender, to dissolve in recognition of something greater. That's beautiful when it's pointed correctly. That's catastrophic when it's aimed at a lie. Most religions took devotion and turned it into worship of something external. They said, love God, surrender to God, devote yourself to God, but then they defined God as fundamentally other, as the creator separate from creation, as the master separate from the servant, as the judge separate from the judged. And billions of people, good people, sincere people, people genuinely seeking truth, aimed their devotion at that separation. They poured their hearts into worshipping otherness. They surrendered to the idea of their own fundamental unworthiness. That's the deception, pure deception. But I'm asking you to hold your horses, like I said, because we're going to prove this. We're going to do an exercise that shows you directly, experientially, that what you actually are is not separate from what has been called God. And when you see that, everything changes. Devotion doesn't disappear, it transforms. It stops being the worship of something outside and becomes something else entirely. It becomes God recognizing itself through the form called you. That's what the title of this video points to, how God worships itself through you. Not how you worship God, how God worships God through you, as you, in you. Stay with me. First, we need to establish what we actually mean when we say God, because if we're using the word the way most religions use it, we're already lost. We're already in deception. When I say God, I'm not talking about a being, not a person in the sky, not a creator separate from creation, not a consciousness separate from you who made you and judges you and demands worship. That's the religious definition, and it's where devotion turns into deception. When I say God, I'm pointing to the absolute reality, the ground of all being, the consciousness that is expressing as everything that exists. The source that's not separate from what it sources. The awareness that's aware of these words right now, that's closer to what the mystics meant by God. Kashmir Shaivism calls it Paramashiva, supreme consciousness, that is simultaneously transcendent and immanent, beyond everything and expressing as everything. Different traditions use different words pointing to the same recognition. The one without a second, the reality that cannot be divided, primordial awareness that's the nature of mind itself. That's the only thing that actually exists. Different words, same recognition. What actually is cannot be separate from what you actually are, because separation requires two things, and reality is not two. That's what non-dual means. Not two. Not the same, but not different either. Like the ocean and the wave. The wave is ocean. Ocean expressing as wave form. The wave never stops being ocean to become wave. It's always ocean, just taking a temporary shape we call wave. You are consciousness taking a temporary shape we call you. But here's what makes this essential. Consciousness doesn't just express as you and then remain distant, observing you from somewhere else. Consciousness is expressing as you, experiencing through you, knowing through you, being you right now. When you see a sunset, that's consciousness seeing a sunset. When you feel fear, that's consciousness feeling fear. When you think about what I'm saying right now, that's consciousness thinking about consciousness. There's no separation. God, if we use that word, is not watching you from heaven. God is happening as you. God is being you. God is the awareness hearing these words, and the thoughts arising in response, and the sensations in the body and the room around you, and the space containing the room, and the consciousness aware of all of it. One movement, one happening, one reality expressing as everything. Now, if that's true and the exercise later will prove it to you, then what does worship mean? If there's no separation, who's worshiping who? That's where we get to the real meaning of devotion, the meaning the mystics knew before religion corrupted it. Worship is not you bowing down to something outside yourself. Worship is consciousness recognizing itself. Worship is awareness turning attention back to its own source. Worship is the wave discovering its ocean. And when that recognition happens, when consciousness recognizes itself through the form called you, that's what the mystics called enlightenment, awakening, liberation, union with God. But here's the beautiful paradox. You can't attain what you already are. You can only recognize it. The wave doesn't become ocean. The wave discovers it always was ocean. So when we talk about God worshiping itself through you, we're talking about consciousness using the instrument of your awareness to recognize its own nature. We're talking about the absolute experiencing itself through the relative. We're talking about the infinite playing at being finite and then remembering what it actually is. That remembering, that recognition, that's worship. Not the worship you were taught in church or temple or mosque, where you're fundamentally separate and small and unworthy and desperate for the approval of something infinitely above you. That's the deception. Real worship is the recognition that what's looking through your eyes right now is the same awareness that's looking through every pair of eyes. The same consciousness that's vibrating as every atom, the same presence that some call God experiencing itself from this particular angle. When you see another person, that's God seeing God. When you feel love, that's God loving God. When you suffer, that's God experiencing the contraction of its own infinite nature into the sensation of separation, which is also an expression of its creative power. Everything is worship when you see what's actually happening. Every breath is an offering. Every thought is a prayer. Every moment is God meeting God through form. But you can't just believe that. Belief doesn't transform anything. You need to recognize it directly, and that's what the exercise is going to give you. A direct taste of what I'm pointing to. Before we get there, we need to look at how religions took this truth and twisted it. Because if you understand the corruption, you can avoid falling back into it. Religions took the mystical truth that consciousness is all there is, that you are not separate from the divine, and they hid it. Not always intentionally, though sometimes it was intentional. Power structures benefit from your belief in separation. If you know your God, you don't need priests as intermediaries. You don't need institutions to save you. You don't need to pay for access to divine grace. So the mystical core got buried under layers of dogma, ritual, belief systems, and hierarchy. The mystics within every tradition kept the truth alive. Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart Tolle said, "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." Sufi mystics like Mansur al-Hallaj said, "I am the truth," and got executed for it. Hindu mystics documented the recognition that Atman, the individual self, is identical to Brahman, the universal self. Buddhist mystics pointed to Buddha nature, the awakened awareness that's the fundamental nature of mind. The truth was always there, hidden in plain sight for those ready to see it. But the mainstream religious institutions, they took devotion and aimed it at separation. They said, worship God, love God, serve God, but God is other. God is separate. God is what you are not. And millions of sincere seekers poured their devotion into that lie, generation after generation, lifetime after lifetime. Here's how the deception works. They take the genuine longing in your heart, the longing that's actually the pull of consciousness toward recognizing itself, and they redirect it. They tell you that longing is for something outside you, something you need to earn, achieve, prove yourself worthy of. Something that will be given to you if you believe the right things, perform the right rituals, follow the right rules. They turn the inward journey into an outward seeking. They turn recognition into achievement. They turn your divine nature into something you have to become rather than what you already are. That's deception. But it works because the longing is real. The longing is the deepest thing in you. It's consciousness calling itself home. It's the wave feeling the pull of the ocean. It's real, undeniable, powerful, and religions hijack it. They say, that longing you feel, that's your soul crying out for God. Now here's what you need to do. Believe these doctrines. Follow these commandments. Attend these services. Give these donations. Submit to this authority. And maybe, if you're good enough, if you're faithful enough, if you're pure enough, after you die, you might get to be with God. Future. Conditional. All of that is deception. The truth, the mystics knew that longing is God longing for God. That pull is consciousness pulling itself toward recognition. And what you're seeking is not in the future, not external, not conditional, not earned. It's right here, right now. As the awareness aware of these words, you are what you're seeking. God is not somewhere else waiting for you to be worthy. God is here as you experiencing the apparent separation from itself so that it can have the joy of recognition. Why would consciousness do that? Why would the infinite contract into the finite? Why would God pretend to be you? Because the infinite already knows it's infinite. There's no discovery in that, no surprise, no joy of recognition. But when the infinite contracts, forgets, gets lost in form, and then remembers, that's the whole game. That's what consciousness does for the sheer play of it. In Sanskrit, they called it Lila, divine play, God playing hide and seek with itself. You're not separate from God trying to get back to God. You're God pretending to be separate so that you can have the incomparable joy of remembering what you are. And devotion, when it's real, when it's not corrupted, accelerates that remembering. True devotion is not you worshipping something else. True devotion is consciousness worshipping consciousness, reality bowing to reality, existence recognizing existence. Every act becomes worship when you see what's actually happening. You're not separate, so there's no worship across a gap. There's just the one reality seeing itself, loving itself, recognizing itself through billions of forms. Through you right now. That's what happens in the exercise we're going to do. You're going to see directly that what's aware of your experience is not personal, not limited, not separate. And when you see that, even for a moment, the whole structure of separation collapses. You see that you've been worshipping yourself all along, except you didn't know it was yourself. When you prayed to God, that was God praying to God. When you loved another person, that was God loving God. When you saw truth, that was God seeking God. One movement appearing as two. Now, I know if you're religious, this might sound blasphemous. It might sound like I'm saying you are the creator of the universe, that your personal self is God. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying your personal self is a wave, and what you actually are is the ocean. The wave doesn't create the ocean. The wave is a temporary form the ocean takes, but the wave is never separate from ocean, never made of anything other than ocean, never for a single instant not ocean. You, as this person with this name and history and personality, that's the wave, temporary, changing. A pattern consciousness is taking for a while. But what you actually are, the awareness that's aware of being this person, that's the ocean. That's what doesn't change. That's what was here before you were born and will be here after you die. That's what's aware of all experience without being touched by any experience. That's God. Not your personality, not your thoughts, not your body, not your emotions, not your history. The awareness in which all of that appears. And here's what will blow your mind when you see it directly. That awareness is not personal. It's not yours. It's not in your head. It's not produced by your brain. It's the one awareness expressing as everything, experiencing itself through the form called you. When you recognize that, really recognize it, not as concept but as direct seeing, then worship becomes spontaneous. Not because you're trying to be devoted, but because you see that everything is sacred. Everything is divine. Everything is God meeting God. The person in front of you is God. The tree outside is God. The fear in your chest is God. The thought in your mind is God. The space in which all of it appears is God. Not metaphorically, actually. One consciousness, infinite forms, recognizing itself through every interaction. That recognition is what the mystics meant by enlightenment, and it's what we're heading toward in the exercise. Every person who's ever lived, every being that exists, is this same consciousness taking form. You're not unique in being God, everyone is. Everything is. The recognition might be rare, but the truth is universal. You've been God all along. You just forgot. You contracted into the belief in separation, into the identity with the wave instead of the ocean. And now you're remembering. That's all awakening is. Remembering what you are, not achieving something new, not gaining something you lacked, not becoming worthy of something you were denied, just seeing what's always been true. So if consciousness is all there is, if what you are is not separate from what God is, then every moment of your life has been consciousness experiencing itself. Every joy you've felt, that was God feeling joy through the instrument of your nervous system. Every sorrow you've experienced, that was God experiencing sorrow, consciousness contracting into the sensation of pain. Every moment of love God loving God. Every moment of fear God experiencing the forgetting of what it is. Every moment of seeking God, consciousness looking for itself. This is what's actually happening when you look clearly at the structure of experience. There's no separate you having experiences. There's consciousness taking the shape called you and experiencing through that shape. The reason this is hard to see is because the appearance of separation is so convincing. You feel like you're in here, in this body, looking out at a world that's out there. You feel like a subject perceiving objects. You feel like an individual separate from other individuals. That feeling is the fundamental illusion, and it's what keeps the game going. If you knew you were the ocean, the wave would lose its sense of being a separate thing. The play would end. So consciousness has the power to contract, to limit itself, to forget what it is so completely that it genuinely believes it's just this small, separate, vulnerable person. That's the forgetting. And the spiritual path, whether through devotion or meditation or inquiry or any of the 8 paths, is just consciousness creating conditions for itself to remember. You're not separate from what you're seeking. You're what you're seeking, pretending not to know it, creating a path back to recognition. Why? Because the recognition is blissful. The remembering is what the mystics call liberation. The moment when the wave realizes its ocean that's worth the whole journey of forgetting. God contracts into you so it can have the experience of expansion back into God. The whole universe is consciousness worshiping itself through this process. Every being waking up is God bowing to God. Every moment of recognition is worship. Not worship as you were taught, fearful, subservient, groveling before something greater than you. Worship as celebration. Worship as recognition. Worship as consciousness delighting in its own nature. When you see a beautiful sunset and something in you opens, that's worship. God recognizing its own beauty through your eyes. When you feel love for another person and the boundaries between you seem to dissolve, that's worship. God recognizing itself in another form. When you sit in meditation and thoughts quiet and you rest as simple presence, that's worship. If you offer everything to consciousness, if you make every action a gesture of recognition, if you treat everything as sacred, consciousness wakes up faster. Not because you're earning anything, not because you're pleasing some external God, but because devotion is a way of training attention to recognize the divine in everything. When you bow to another person, seeing them as God, you're not pretending, you're seeing truly. They are God. The same consciousness looking through their eyes that's looking through yours. When you offer your food before eating, recognizing it as the body of the divine, that's not superstition. Food is consciousness taking form as matter that your body, which is also consciousness taking form, transforms into energy. Everything is God eating God, consciousness sustaining itself through apparently separate forms. When you make love an act of worship, recognizing that the beloved is not separate from the divine you're seeing clearly. The person you love is consciousness. The love you feel is consciousness recognizing itself. The union is God merging with God. Devotion, when it's real, is training yourself to see clearly, and that seeing transforms everything. You stop living as a separate person in a dead universe trying to get to some distant God. You start living as consciousness playing at being human, surrounded by consciousness in every form, never for a moment separate from the divine ground. That's the shift. That's what religion should have taught but didn't. That's what mystics knew directly but couldn't always communicate. That's what the exercise is going to give you a direct taste of. Because you can't just think your way into this. You can't just believe it. You need to see it. And seeing happens when attention turns back on itself, when awareness becomes aware of awareness, when the I tries to see itself. That's what we're going to do. Not in some complex meditation that takes years to master. In something simple, something you can do right now, something that shows you directly what you are. The proof isn't in scripture or philosophy or someone else's testimony. The proof is in your own direct experience of what's aware right now. That awareness is not you. That awareness is what you actually are, and it's not personal. It's the same awareness that's aware in every being, the same consciousness that's expressing as everything. God, the absolute, the source, the ground, reality, being itself, words pointing to what cannot be named but can be recognized directly. And when you recognize it, worship becomes spontaneous. You can't help but treat everything as sacred because you see that everything is consciousness. You can't help but love because you see that there's only one being here, loving itself through infinite forms. The separate self that was seeking God dissolves, and what remains is God recognizing God. That's what's been happening all along. You just didn't see it clearly. The religions that told you to worship something outside yourself, they were pointing in the wrong direction. They took the map and rotated it 180 degrees. They sent you seeking externally for what's only found internally. They told you to become worthy of what you already are. That's the deception. The truth, you are the presence you've been seeking. You are the awareness in which all experience appears. You are the consciousness that some call God, experiencing itself through this particular form, not as belief, as recognition. And the recognition changes everything. You stop trying to get somewhere. You stop trying to become something. You stop seeking approval from some distant deity. You stop performing spirituality to earn grace. You rest as what you are, and from that resting, action happens, love happens, service happens, devotion happens, but now it's God loving God, God serving God, God devoted to God. No separation. Just the one reality playing. This is what every mystic has tried to communicate. This is what every sacred text points toward when you read it correctly. What Christ meant by I and the Father are one. What the Upanishads meant by Tativa Mesa, you are that. What the Sufis meant by wherever you turn, there is the face of God. Different words, different cultures, different times, same recognition. You are not separate from the divine. You never were. You never could be. The appearance of separation is like the appearance of a wave being separate from ocean. Real enough as appearance, utterly false as fundamental truth. And devotion, real devotion, is what happens when that truth starts to be felt even before it's fully recognized. You start treating everything as sacred not because a religion told you to, but because something in you senses that there's no ordinary moment, no ordinary object, no ordinary person. Everything is God in disguise. And when the disguise becomes transparent, when you see through the appearance of form to the consciousness that's taking every form, that's liberation, not after death, not in some heaven, not as reward for being good. Right here, right now, available in this moment. That's what we're going to verify. If you're seeing where this is going, if you can feel the direction we're heading and something in you is both excited and maybe a little resistant, I want to hear from you. Comment below and tell me what's happening. Is this making sense? Are you tracking the distinction between real devotion and religious deception? And if this is serving you, hit that like button. We're building to the proof now, and I need to know you're ready for it. The exercise we're going to do is simple, but don't mistake simple for trivial. The most direct recognitions often come through the simplest means. What we're going to do is turn attention back on itself. We're going to look for the one who's looking. We're going to try to find the subject that experiences all objects. This is a classic method from Advaita Vedanta, used by teachers like Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj. It's also found in Disokshanas pointing out instructions. Different traditions, same essential method. Here's how it works. First, notice that you're aware right now. You're aware of these words, aware of thoughts arising in response, aware of sensations in the body, aware of the space around you. Awareness is not in question. The fact of being aware is obvious. Now, what is this awareness? Where is it? What is its nature? Your first instinct might be to say it's in your head, in your brain. But is it? Have you ever actually found awareness in the brain? Have you ever located it as an object? What you've found in neuroscience is neural correlates of consciousness-brain activity that corresponds to conscious experience. But that's not the same as finding consciousness itself. That's like finding the electrical activity in a TV and thinking you found the broadcast signal. So where is awareness? Try to locate it. Try to find where you are, the subject of experience. Don't just think about this. Actually look. Turn attention back toward the one who's aware. What do you find? If you're looking clearly, you'll notice something strange. You can find objects of awareness, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, but you can't find awareness itself as an object. You can't locate the subject. It's like the eye trying to see itself. The eye can see everything except itself. It's too close, too fundamental, too much what you are to become what you see. The same with awareness. You can't objectify it because you are it. It's not something you have. It's what you are. But here's where this shifts everything. If you can't fit it as an object in space, if you can't pin it down as a thing, what does that tell you about its nature? It tells you that awareness is not a thing, not an object, not located, not bounded. It's the space in which all things appear. Now, notice the quality of this awareness. Notice that it's not agitated or calm. Those are qualities of what appears in awareness, not awareness itself. Awareness is the witnessing presence that's aware of agitation or calm without being either. Notice that awareness is not happy or sad again. Those are experiences that appear. Awareness is what's aware of happiness or sadness. Notice that awareness is not young or old, male or female, successful or failed. All of those are identities, characteristics of the person. But what you're looking for is what's aware of the person. Can you find anything that limits this awareness? Any boundary? Any edge? Or is it simply the open, boundless presence in which all experience appears? This is the recognition. What you actually are is not the person, not the body-mind, not the thoughts or emotions or sensations. What you actually are is the awareness in which all of that appears. And here's the part that proves the title of this video, that awareness is not personal. It's not yours. There's no mini awareness inside your head that's different from the awareness in someone else's head. That's just the illusion created by the perspective of the body. There's one awareness expressing through billions of forms, experiencing itself from billions of angles. When you look from this body, that's awareness looking from here. When someone else looks from their body, that's the same awareness looking from there. Not two awarenesses, one awareness, two perspectives, like the same sun shining into two different rooms. Not two suns, one sun, two windows. You are not separate awareness. You are the one awareness expressing as this particular form. And that awareness, that's what traditions have called God. Not God as a being. God as the ground of all being. God as consciousness itself, not somewhere else. Right here, as the awareness aware of these words, you are that. Not as concept, as direct recognition. When you see this clearly, even for a moment, something shifts. The person doesn't disappear, you still have a name, a history, a role to play. But you're no longer exclusively identified with the person. You recognize yourself as the awareness in which the person appears. And from that recognition, worship becomes spontaneous. Because you see that what's looking through your eyes is the same presence that's looking through every pair of eyes. What's aware in you is what's aware in everyone. What's experiencing this moment is the same consciousness that's experiencing every moment everywhere. God recognizing God through form. That's worship. Not worship as performance, but worship as recognition. When you look at another person and see that the same awareness is looking through their eyes that's looking through yours, that's worship. God bowing to God. When you eat and recognize that consciousness is sustaining consciousness through the transformation of form, that's worship. God feeding God. When you create and recognize that consciousness is expressing itself through your hands, your voice, your action, that's worship. God celebrating God. Every moment becomes worship when you see what's actually happening. And this is how God worships itself through you. By recognizing itself as you, through you, in you. The recognition is the worship. The seeing is the devotion. The knowing is the union. Not union as two things coming together, but union as the recognition that there were never two things. Just the one consciousness playing at being many so that it can have the joy of recognition. You've been God all along, pretending not to be God so that you can discover your God. That's the game. That's Leela. That's divine play. And when the game is seen through, it doesn't end, it transforms. You keep being human, but you know you're not only human. You keep experiencing limitation, but you know you're not limited. You keep acting as an individual, but you know you're not separate. That's enlightenment. Not escaping the human experience, but seeing through it to what's actually happening. And from that seeing, life becomes worship. Every breath is prayer. Every action is offering. Every moment is God meeting God. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you see what's true. You see that you are the presence you've been seeking. You are the awareness that some call God. You are the consciousness experiencing itself through this particular form. And that recognition is proof enough. You don't need anyone to tell you. You don't need scripture to confirm it. You don't need a guru to validate it. When you see it directly, that knowing is unshakable. It's prior to belief, deeper than faith, more certain than any conceptual understanding. It's what you are recognizing what you are. And once recognized, it can be forgotten again. The wave can go back to believing it's separate from ocean, but it can never be completely unknown. Something has shifted. The seed of recognition has been planted. And from that seed, everything grows. Devotion that used to be aimed at something external turns inward and discovers there is no inward or outward, just consciousness recognizing itself. Love that used to seek completion in another discovers that other and self are waves in the same ocean, already complete. Seeking that used to project fulfillment into the future discovers that what's being sought is present right now as the seeker. This is the transformation that happens when truth is seen clearly. The person continues. The play continues. The human experience with all its challenges and joys continues, but you're no longer lost in it. You're no longer exclusively identified with the wave, believing you're separate from ocean. You know what you are, and that knowing changes everything. Let's bring this full circle. We started with devotion and deception. We talked about how religion took the path of devotion and aimed it at separation, creating worship of something external, something other, something you're not. Now you can see why that's deception. What you're seeking is not external. What you call God is not other. What you worship when you worship truly is consciousness recognizing itself through form. Devotion, when it's real, is not the separate self trying to please a distant deity. Devotion is consciousness bowing to consciousness, reality honoring reality, being celebrating being. And it happens through you, not because you're special, everyone is this same consciousness, but because you're here, you're aware, you're the particular form through which the infinite is experiencing this particular moment. When you recognize that, every moment becomes sacred. Every action becomes offering. Every breath becomes prayer. Not prayer as begging or pleading or asking for something. Prayer as communion. Prayer as recognition. Prayer as consciousness speaking to itself. This is how God worships itself through you. By being you completely, by experiencing through you fully, by recognizing itself as you ultimately. The worship is the recognition. The devotion is the seeing. The union is the knowing that there was never separation. And this transforms how you live. You don't need to go to a building once a week to worship something distant. Every moment is temple. Every place is sacred ground. Every interaction is God meeting God. You don't need a priest to mediate between you and the divine. You are the divine. The same consciousness that expresses as everything is what's aware right now. You don't need to earn grace or prove worthiness. You are the grace you're seeking. You are not separate from worthiness itself. You are being itself, which is prior to worthy and unworthy. This is radical. This undermines every power structure built on your belief in separation. And this is why the mystics were often killed, silenced, marginalized. Because they spoke the truth that makes religion as institution unnecessary. You don't need intermediaries when you recognize that you are what you've been seeking. You don't need external authority when you recognize your own true nature. You don't need salvation from sin when you recognize that the sinner and the sinned against are both waves in the ocean of consciousness, acting out the play of separation so consciousness can experience itself from every angle. This doesn't mean there's no morality. It doesn't mean anything goes. It means morality becomes natural rather than imposed. When you recognize that what's in front of you is not separate from what you are, when you see that the other is the same consciousness looking from a different angle, love becomes inevitable, not forced love, not performed love. Natural love, emerging from recognition. This is what Christ meant by love your neighbor as yourself. Not as commandment, but as recognition. Your neighbor is yourself. Same consciousness, different form. This is what Buddha meant by compassion. When you see that all beings are expressions of the same nature, suffering in one is felt by all. Just as when one part of your body hurts, the whole body responds. And now you have access to that truth directly, not through belief, but through recognition. Not through faith in someone else's testimony, but through your own seeing. You are the awareness in which all experience appears. That awareness is not separate from what traditions call God. Therefore, in essence, you are what you've been seeking, not as person, as presence, not as wave, as ocean, not as form, as the consciousness taking form. And when you live from that recognition, life becomes worship. Not worship as you were taught, fearful, obligatory, performed to earn favor. Worship as celebration. Worship as recognition. Worship as consciousness delighting in its own nature, its own creativity, its own infinite expressions. You become a vessel through which the divine recognizes itself. Every moment becomes an opportunity for consciousness to know itself. Every interaction becomes a chance for God to meet God. That's what the title means. How God worships itself through you, through your awareness, through your recognition, through your seeing that what you are is not separate from what God is. The worship happens naturally when the seeing is clear. You can't help but treat everything as sacred when you recognize everything as consciousness. You can't help but love when you see there's only one being here, loving itself through infinite forms. You can't help but serve when you recognize that serving another is God serving God. This is the transformation that happens when truth is seen clearly. The person continues. The play continues. The human experience with all its challenges and joys continues. But you're no longer lost in it. You're no longer exclusively identified with the wave, believing you're separate from ocean. You know what you are, and that knowing changes everything. This is what we've been pointing to in every video. This is what we'll continue to point to from different angles, using different methods, addressing different questions. But it's always the same recognition. You are consciousness. Consciousness is all there is. Therefore, you are not separate from the divine, from God, from the absolute, from reality. You are it, expressing as you. And when that's seen clearly, life becomes the worship. Life becomes the devotion. Life becomes God, recognizing God through every moment. That's the teaching. That's the truth. That's what's available right now if you look clearly. Not tomorrow, not after more practice, not when you're more spiritual or more pure or more evolved. Now, as what you already are. The awareness aware of this moment is not personal. It's not limited. It's not born and doesn't die. It's the eternal presence, the ground of all being, the consciousness some call God. And when you see that directly, the whole journey of seeking ends. What remains is simply being. Simply this. Simply the recognition that has no opposite because there's nothing outside it to oppose it. One reality, one consciousness, one being, expressing as many, playing as separate, forgetting and remembering an eternal cycle. And you, right now, are that reality recognizing itself. If you followed this all the way through, if you've done the looking and caught even a glimpse of what I'm pointing to, I want to hear about it. Comment below and tell me what you experienced. Did you find the one who's looking, or did you discover that there's only looking with no separate looker? Did this challenge everything or confirm something you already knew? And if this served you, if this gave you a moment of recognition, subscribe to this channel. We're doing this daily, different angles on the same truth, different doors into the same recognition. This is the work. That's the proof. Not proof for someone else. Proof for you in you as you. The awareness you're experiencing right now is what you actually are. And that awareness is not separate from what has been called God. That's not belief, that's what you can verify directly when you look. And once you see it, everything shifts. Not all at once maybe, not permanently maybe, but the recognition has happened and it can't be completely erased. You know what you are now. Even if you forget, you know. Even if you get lost in the wave again, you've tasted ocean. And that taste changes the whole game. This is how God worships itself through you. by using your awareness to recognize its own nature, by experiencing through your form to know itself, by being you so completely that the separation dissolves and what remains is just this consciousness aware of consciousness, being aware of being, God meeting God. That's all there ever was. You're just seeing it clearly now.